So the title that brought you here is Why the Jews? Making sense of the explosive surge in anti-Semitism. Some insights into Jew hatred and how to deal with it. And is there, in fact, a reason for anti-Semitism? By divine providence, today in Israel is observed as Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. I don't think we could have timed it more appropriately if we tried. The Prime Minister and the President in Israel will be addressing the nation today on this theme. So I'm in good company. In April, end of April and May 2023, just almost exactly 1 year ago, my wife and I led a tour of Israel of our congregation. We did 3 over the years. This was the 3rd one. And we'd done all the major visits previously, so we tried to do something different that people hadn't seen or experienced, so we decided to go south. Of course, we did the Western Wall and all the main holy sites, but for the first time in all our tours, we went south. We went to Sde Boker, Ben Gurion's home, and we had a connection with a previous tour guide on our second tour. His name is Ralph Lewison. He hails from Namibia, Southwest Africa. So we're sort of landslides, so I think he studied in South Africa, so we had a connection with him. And he happens to live in a place called Kfar Aza. You heard of it? Unfortunately, it became notorious as one of the kibbutzim on the Gaza border that were overrun by the murderous terrorists on October 7th. Ralph gave us the tour of his beautiful kibbutz. Some 700 souls lived there. He said this place is 90% heaven, 10% hell. When things are quiet, it's heaven. 10% of the time when rockets from Gaza come across and we have to run to shelters and the sirens go, it's hell. But that's 10%. It's worth it for the other 90% of heaven. Tragically, on October 7th, Kfar Aza became 100% hell. Thankfully, Ralph and his family survived. But 52 of the 700 residents were butchered. 20 are still missing, I think. And all of them are still displaced and grappling with if and how and when to return to their homes. What a difference 5 months can make. So we experienced a little bit of that, a glimpse into where this happened. But anti-Semitism is not limited to Israel. The greatest universities in America are becoming completely unstuck. Jewish students are unsafe, rethinking where they should go to study. Is it safe to go to Columbia University? In the biggest Jewish city in the world, New York City. New York is a Jewish city. You know, a couple of years ago, the no parking signs in New York, in Manhattan, the official municipal no parking signs in New York did not say no parking. You know what they said? Don't even think of parking here. That's Jewish. It's a Jewish city. In the biggest Jewish city in the world, Jewish students are unsafe in Columbia. It's mind-boggling. Believe it or not, thank God in South Africa, where we live, despite our anti-Israel government party, the African National Congress, that took Israel to the International Court of Justice, the country is very supportive of Israel and Jewish people. We have very little anti-Semitism, actually, in South Africa. You'd be pleased and maybe surprised to hear. The leading power in the government is a problem, and there's an election in about a month's time, and we're hoping and praying for some positive changes. Back in the early 1950s, the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, who sent my wife and I to South Africa, who inspired our children to come here to Kauai, Rebbe was the biggest global leader who changed the Jewish world after the Holocaust. In the early 50s, when he was still a young Rebbe in Brooklyn, he was visited by a then famous Jewish novelist named Harvey Swados. And it was easy to get a personal audience with the Rebbe and talk to him, and he sort of interviewed him. And towards the end of the meeting, they were talking about the Holocaust, which was only a few years earlier. And the writer asked the Rebbe, "Rabbi, do you think it could happen again?" When I read the Rebbe's answer, I was shocked. I could not absorb his answer. His answer was, I'll say it in Yiddish. Anybody speak Yiddish? No? Don't all raise your hands at once. Could it happen again? He said, "Morgen in the free," which means tomorrow morning. It could happen again tomorrow morning. God forbid. God forbid 6 million times. He said it will not happen. But could, as far as the nations of the world, could it happen again? Tomorrow morning. I could not absorb this. I'm born in Brooklyn, an American kid. I followed baseball. I played basketball. Sandy Koufax was my hero in the 60s. You know? Joe Lieberman was a hair's breadth away from being vice president of the United States, an Orthodox Jew who just passed away a month ago. Jews could achieve, and did achieve, anything and everything in the United States. In commerce, in the judiciary, in the professions, even in Hollywood. There was total freedom, equal rights. Tomorrow morning? I couldn't grasp it. Tragically, today, I get it. Sadly, today, I absorb it all too well. We see it happening. We see it mushrooming from university to university, from country to country. And it's unbelievable that an officially designated terrorist, murderous organization is being supported openly and publicly by so-called normal people, by so-called enlightened people. Mind-boggling. Some years ago, I read a book by Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin, and I took the title of this talk from that book. It was called Why the Jews? And they went through all the possible reasons for anti-Semitism. Jews were responsible for the death of their Lord. Jews slaughtered Christian children for the Passover wines. We poisoned the wells. We stole their wealth. All kinds of crazy concoctions. We know, and they wrote about it in the book, that none of these are reasons. They're possibly excuses and rationalizations for people who want to hate. But they do argue that there is a reason. And they say that Jews get on people's nerves. But not for the reasons you think. You think because we're always trying to get a good deal, right? You know, we bargain them down, you know. Value for money. It's a Jewish trait. That's not the reason. I don't know if you ever came across the famous bathroom graffiti. An anti-Semite wrote on the bathroom door, "How odd of God to choose the Jews." And the Jew came in afterwards and wrote on the bottom of the same door, he said, "No, not odd. The Jews chose God." Sometimes graffiti has a lot of wisdom, you know. Unlike the nation of the world, we chose to accept the Torah. At Mount Sinai, 3,300 plus years ago, God was peddling his wares to the world. I have a Torah, I have a book of laws, of values. Who wants it? Every nation refused it. The Jewish people accepted it. And we chose, ever since then, we have made a conscious choice to align ourselves with the cause of justice and righteousness, morality and virtue in every generation, in every situation. If you think about it, every movement for social change and justice has had Jews at its forefront. Remember some of the names of the hippies back in the 60s? Rubin, Hoffman, and more. Communism. Karl Marx was Jewish. Socialism, Bundism, hippieism, global warming, save the whales, save the Hawaiian monk seals, you name it. There are Jews at the forefront of all of these movements, leading the charge, way, way above our percentage of the population. We say in the Olenu prayer at the end of every service, Litaken Olam, and it's become a mantra for many Jews, Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. We have a job and a mission and a mandate to do our best to make the world a better place, for everyone, not just for ourselves. Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. As you heard, we live in South Africa, where the greatest icon in South African history was, of course, a gentleman named Nelson Mandela, who my wife and I and our family were privileged to meet on a number of occasions. I have a picture with him and us hanging in my office back in Johannesburg. Mandela was sentenced to life in prison for treason against the old apartheid regime back in a trial, the famous Rivonia trial that stretched from 1963, 1964. But it wasn't only Mandela who was on trial. It was a whole group, a whole chevra of treason, plotters, revolutionaries. 5 out of Mandela's 12 co-defendants were Jews. Jews are 1/4% of the population, and 40% of Mandela's partners in crime for the struggle of the oppressed black majority were Jews. What does that tell you? The Talmud says a very strange thing. We know Mount Sinai was the venue where we got the 10 Commandments and God gave us the Torah and our whole way of life. Greatest revelation in history. Revelation at Sinai. But did you know that the word Sinai in Hebrew, Sinai, it's pronounced, is related, according to the Talmud, to another Hebrew word, spelled somewhat differently but sounds the same, Sinah. Sinah means hatred. What does hatred have to do with Sinai, Mount Sinai? Says the Talmud something quite radical, that from Mount Sinai, when the Jews received the Torah, the 10 Commandments, and we became mandated to be a light unto the nations, from there came Sinah, hatred of the Jewish people. And this is in line with what Prager and Telushkin were arguing, that Jews get on people's nerves. Why? Not because we drive a hard bargain, but because we are the conscience of the world. And not everybody wants to have a conscience. People want to be able to feel free to do as they please, not to have guilt. Let me ask you a question. Do you know who said this? These words, I quote, "The Ten Commandments have lost their validity. And as for conscience, that was a Jewish invention too. Conscience is a blemish on the human psyche, like that other Jewish invention, circumcision. Circumcision damages the body, and conscience damages the soul." Anybody know who authored that? A little louder?
Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemo, spot on. Hitler said those words. Elsewhere, he put it even more bluntly, and I quote, "The struggle for world domination is between me and the Jews," said Hitler. "All else is meaningless. The Jews have inflicted two wounds on the world, circumcision for the body and conscience for the soul. I come to free mankind from their shackles." Unquote, Hitler. The world doesn't want a conscience. Wittingly or unwittingly, by birth, by design, or by the experience of history, Jews have become the conscience of the world. And the world doesn't like it. And Hitler found many kindred spirits across Europe and beyond. There's a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, how the people in Lithuania and Poland and Latvia and Ukraine and all those European countries were only too happy to join in the fun and help the Nazi killing machine and plunder and pillage Jewish communities. And tragically, unbelievably, Hitler is finding thousands and thousands of supporters around the world today. So that's one insight into whether there is in fact a reason for anti-Semitism, and some argue that there is, and the reason is that we are the conscience of the world, and the world doesn't want to be bothered or inhibited by matters of conscience. Let me ask you something. What do you think were the two main responses to anti-Semitism throughout history and in our own recent times? How did Jews respond to anti-Semitism? Anyone? That's my answer. I'm looking for how, yeah?
Well, I think it's one of the natural responses is to hide.
To hide. Thank you. What's another word for hiding your Jewishness? Assimilating, correct.
I was just going to say to not believe that it was really happening.
Shock and disbelief. Yeah, that's what's happening today. We're all in shock and disbelief at what's going on in the world. We can't absorb it. But assimilation, hiding it, running for cover, blending into the scenery. To hide one's Jewishness and basically integrate and assimilate into the general population is one of the classic historical responses of Jews to anti-Semitism. There was another one.
Like coming together and standing together.
Okay.
Survival.
You heard of Theodor Herzl?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was his solution? Zionism was one of the historic responses to anti-Semitism. Herzl was a journalist at the Dreyfus trial, a notorious anti-Semitic trial in Europe. He saw the open anti-Semitism. He saw that Alfred Dreyfus was an innocent man and being framed for something he never did, and it was clearly anti-Semitism. And he said, you know what? If the Jews will get out of Europe and have our own place, live and let live. We won't bother you, you don't bother us, and everybody will be happy. We'll solve the problem of anti-Semitism. Little did he know. Let's go back to assimilation. In Europe, during the Second World War, being Jewish was a death sentence. Some of you may know my late father of blessed memory was the sole survivor of his whole family from Poland. Sole survivor. Thank God he rebuilt his family, and when he passed away some years ago, left over 100 blood descendants, including 80 great-grandchildren. So, thank God. But many people did not go back and rebuild their Jewish families. Many people said, I'm out of here. I don't want to die. I don't want my children to be persecuted. So they went as far away from Europe as they could go, places like Australia and America. And they didn't even tell their children they were Jews, to spare them the suffering. One such Jew was born Jaime Cohen, but then he became Horatio Cowan. Changed his name. I think he had a nose job, so he didn't look Jewish. And he was a successful guy, so to finish his complete assimilation into the general culture, he applied to a very posh country club where no Jews were allowed. But he's not Jaime Cohen, he's Horatio Cowan. And he wears plaid socks. And he learned how to play polo. And did all kinds of things Jews never did, you know. So he applies to this fancy club, and it looks like it's going through, but the final step is he has to be interviewed by the chairman of the club in person. So he has this interview with Mr. Christopher John Buckingham III. He's not from Brooklyn. And at the interview, Cowan, previously formerly Cohen, what is it? X, formerly Twitter. Right? Cowan, formerly Cohen, is looking at this Mr. Buckingham III, and he seems to think that the man has some Jewish features. And he's saying, is it possible? You know, anyway, after a while, he plucks up the courage. And he says to Mr. Buckingham III, excuse me, sir, possibly any Jewish blood in your family? Buckingham stands up his full height, in his best British accent, says, I beg your pardon, Mr. Cowan. I'm a proud Presbyterian. My father was a proud Presbyterian. My Zeta of blessed memory was a proud There was another Jew applied to such a club, and he was rejected. When he called him up to say, why was his application for membership rejected? They said, it's your religion, sir. He said, what's wrong with my religion? He says, on the application form, under religion, you wrote Goy. Now, let's go back to the other. Assimilation was one, and Zionism was the other. We believe that the Messiah is coming and the dead will live again, believe it or not. We spoke about it on Passover. So Herzl is going to wake up one day, and he's going to come to Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport. He's going to look around. He's going to be hell of impressed with what he started, eh? It's unbelievable. But will Herzl think that his mission and his purpose in establishing a Jewish state was fulfilled? Did it stop anti-Semitism? Where from? On the contrary, the bulk of anti-Semitism today is centered around Israel. The new anti-Semitism is called anti-Zionism. We all know it's one and the same thing. Once upon a time, they said, we love Jews, we only have a problem with Israel. Today, there's no apologies. On university campuses, they say openly, global intifada, which means kill the Jews. So much to Theodor Herzl's disappointment, Zionism did not solve the problem of anti-Semitism. It created a wonderful state, an amazing country, something we're all so proud of. But did it solve anti-Semitism? No way. So is there a reason for anti-Semitism? So we heard Prager and Telushkin said, we have a conscience, people don't want to have a conscience. Let me share with you a different teaching, a different point of view from one of the holy martyrs of the Warsaw Ghetto. Appropriate to mention it today. He was a leading rabbi in Warsaw. Warsaw was the capital of Poland and had, you know how many Jews lived in Warsaw? A few more than Kauai. 350,000 Jews lived in Warsaw before World War II. It was a major Jewish metropolis. Rabbi Menachem Zemba was one of the leading rabbis of Warsaw before the war. He's now incarcerated together with the rest of Warsaw Jewry in a place called the Warsaw Ghetto. And one day, he and two other leading rabbis in the Warsaw Ghetto get a secret message from the Catholic Church. Poland is a Catholic country. They even produced a pope. The Catholic Church sent a secret message to the three leading rabbis of the Warsaw Ghetto that they are offering to get them out, to rescue their lives, to somehow get them out of the ghetto and out of Poland and out of Europe and save their lives. What's the question? Mazel tov. Thank God. Not so simple. The three rabbis sat down to discuss this. What's to discuss? In Jewish law, if you can save a life, there's nothing holier, nothing more important. Save a life, you get in the car on Shabbat, you could, God forbid, if there's no other way to save your life but to eat pork chops on Yom Kippur, if it's going to save your life, then you must do it. So what's the question? Of course they must take this outstretched hand. Not so simple. The rabbis debated amongst themselves, what will the other Jews say? What will all these thousands of Jews trapped in the Warsaw Ghetto say when they discover the three leading rabbis have disappeared? Oh, very nice rabbis. They looked after themselves and left us here to fry. They might become totally disillusioned, not just with rabbis, but with God, with Judaism, with everything. They might become totally depressed. And the three rabbis decided unanimously that they could not accept the offer. Sacrificed their lives for their people. They could have got out, and they chose to stay with their people. And they perished with their people. But while Rabbi Menachem Zemba died, many of his writings survived. I'm going to share with you now a commentary on a verse in Genesis by Rabbi Menachem Zemba, which sheds light on the question, is there a reason behind anti-Semitism? You probably know the story from Genesis, how the two twin brothers, Jacob and Esau, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and Esau, twin brothers, would go their separate ways. Jacob would become one of the founding fathers of our nation. Esau would become the founding father of what became Rome later. There was enmity between the brothers from the early years. Esau threatened to kill his twin brother Jacob because he supposedly took his father's blessings and he took the birthright, even though he gave it to him. For 20 years, they hadn't seen each other. And now Jacob is coming home, and he has to face up to Esau. And Esau is coming out to greet him with a welcoming party of 400 armed desperados. You know, the guys with the bullets down their chest, you know, from Mexico, where are they from? That's the welcoming party. He's looking for blood, Esau. Jacob prepares for war, divides his camp. He prays to God for protection. He engages in diplomacy. He sends a huge gift of herds of livestock to his brother to pacify him. We're still doing all those things, diplomacy, prayer, military. We do it all today. And then the verse comes that they finally meet, the two long-lost brothers. And Jacob is expecting Esau to come at him with a sword or a dagger. And what happens? He sees the gift. He sees Jacob's family, his wives and children. And somehow he's mollified. His heart melts a bit, blood is thicker than water maybe. And instead of stabbing his brother, he embraces him. And the verse says, Vayishokehu, and he kissed him. Strangely, there's a handful of words in the Bible that in a Torah scroll, and we have a few beautiful Torah scrolls behind this beautiful holy ark here, on the Hebrew word there are dots. There's half a handful of such words in the Bible. In the actual Torah there are dots, like an asterisk. What does an asterisk mean? Look at the bottom, there's a footnote, there's a qualifying idea that it's not necessarily as it seems. You got to read between the lines. So there's dots on this word, and he kissed him, where Esau kissed Jacob. And Rashi, the greatest biblical commentator of all, quotes two Talmudic opinions. Why are there dots on this word? The one is because he did not kiss him with all his heart. Kissed him, but there's an asterisk. Wasn't sincere. It was like, the senators are running for election. They kiss the babies, It's a photo op. It wasn't sincere. It wasn't genuine. That's why there's dots. Then Rashi quotes a second opinion. Rabbi Shimon of Lag BaOmer fame. Rabbi Shimon says, halachahi. It is a halacha. It is a law. Halacha means a law. It is a law that Esau hates Jacob. But at that moment, something exceptional happened, and he in fact did kiss him sincerely and genuinely, and he meant it with all his heart. Why the dots? Because it's an exception. Because the norm, the halacha, the law, is that Esau hates Jacob. But this was different, so there's dots. So these are two opposite opinions how to interpret the meaning of the dots. Rabbi Menachem Zemba, the martyr of the Warsaw Ghetto, asks, why does Rabbi Shimon use this strange word, halacha? It is a law that Esau, what do you mean a law? Say it's human nature or disposition. What do you mean it's a law? And he says as follows. Do we always understand the law? I don't know all the bylaws in Kauai, but do you agree with them? You have parking bylaws here or other stuff? Speed? I don't know. Do you agree with all the municipal bylaws? No. I see some of you shaking your heads definitely that you don't agree. I'll tell you an example. In South Africa during COVID, I don't know how it was here. Apparently you were spared. But in South Africa we had serious lockdowns. And the shuls were closed. For months I didn't have a synagogue to go to. I prayed at home. And then when they finally started allowing people back, it was little by little, in bits and pieces. You heard I have a big synagogue, 1,000 people. There were 1,400 seats in our main sanctuary. The government allowed gatherings of no more than 50 people. And it didn't matter what size the venue was. So if you had a shul like Chabad of Kauai here, 50 people. You had a shul of 1,400 seats like mine, 50 people. You had the football stadium that could take 90,000 people, 50 people. Is this logical? It should be based on the size, on the space, how far away, social distancing. What do you mean 50 people no matter the venue? It makes no sense. So the law isn't something we always see as logical. And this was Rabbi Zemba's point. He says law is not always logical. And here when Rabbi Shimon says it is a halacha, it is a law that Esau hates Jacob, he means to say that anti-Semitism is not necessarily logical. And he proved it as follows. In Poland, where he lived, they hated the Jews. The Jews were poor. They called them, the Nazis used the term, a terrible term, scum of the earth. In Germany, the Jews were rich, very successful, very assimilated to German culture. They loved them. They hated them too. They killed them the same. In Russia, Jews were accused of being capitalist bourgeoisie. In America, Jews were hounded for being communists. Did you see Oppenheimer? Rich, poor, communist, capitalist, doesn't matter. There's no logic. You can't win. So too, said Rabbi Menachem Zemba, is the halacha of Esau hating Jacob. Anti-Semitism is a law. It's a fact of life. We don't understand it. We don't get it. It makes no sense. We're nice people. We do so much for our communities, for our countries, for the planet. We're always saving the world, and still the world doesn't like us. It hurts, but it is what it is. Does this mean every non-Jew is an anti-Semite? God forbid to say so. We are the most tolerant faith of all faiths because we are probably the only, or one of the only religions to say that the righteous of other nations will earn a share in the world to come. You know, I've had debates with Christian ministers in South Africa, and they say openly, you know, if you don't sign on with Jesus, you're not going to go to paradise. In fact, they once challenged someone on an interview, one of the evangelical ministers, very successful in Johannesburg, the Rema Church. They said to him, what about the 1 million+ children who were martyred in the Holocaust, innocent little children? Are they in heaven or in hell? He wouldn't answer. Because if you don't accept, then how are you going to get to heaven? That's their belief. We say it doesn't matter what religion you are. If you're a good person, you live like a good person, you'll go to heaven. Okay, we have 7 laws of Noahide laws that God gave Moses, which persons are basic laws of basic code of morality. If you're basically a moral mensch, you can go to heaven no matter what religion you are. That's the Jewish approach. But not everybody else has that approach. So there are many, many righteous Gentiles in the world, thank God. We could use any friend we have. Today, thank God, there are many American Christian evangelicals who are showing tremendous friendship and support to Israel, and we are deeply grateful. My wife and I were traveling in the airport in Johannesburg. A very posh-looking blonde woman came up to us in the lounge to show her support for Israel, what we're going through today. On the way back, we landed in the New York airport. In Newark, a gentleman, Afrikaans fellow, came up and showed his solidarity and support. There are many, many, thank God we have many friends out there. But we also see the illogical, totally illogical, inexplicable anti-Semitism that is going on in the world. So in Europe, they said, go back to Palestine. Now in Palestine, they say, go back to Europe. The anti-Semite says there was no Holocaust. They're Holocaust deniers. The same anti-Semite says Hitler didn't finish the job. Is this logical? You just said there was no Holocaust. What do you mean? There's no logic. There's no normality. Anti-Semitism is an immutable fact of life, like a law, no rhyme or reason. As the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs famously said, anti-Semitism is like a virus. He said this before COVID. He died during COVID. He said anti-Semitism is like a virus, it keeps mutating. Today it's anti-Zionism. That's the new mutation of anti-Semitism. I tell a story in the time of World War II. A Nazi soldier goes up to a Jew and says, "You Jews are the cause of all the world's problems." The Jew says, "Yes, and the bicycle riders." Nazi says, "The bicycle riders? Why the bicycle riders?" The Jew says, "Why the Jews?" That's exactly the point. Exactly the point. Why the Jews? Why the bicycle riders? There's no logic. Now, you may be surprised to learn that one of my great religious heroes wasn't so religious. His name was David Ben-Gurion. You heard of him? So I told you I was in his house in Sde Boker. I was very pleasantly surprised to see a set of the Talmud in his library, a set of the Code of Jewish Law in his library. But he was not known to be very religious at all. But he said something very simple and yet profound, which to me has become like a mantra. He said, "It doesn't matter what the world says. It matters what Israel does." That's the bottom line. They can complain, they can attack, they can condemn, they can do it. We have to do what we have to do for our survival. The IDF, the Israel Defense Force, is the single most moral army in the history of military warfare. And we're accused of genocide. Mind-boggling. So, we need the Anti-Defamation League, we need the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we need all these representatives who try to fight anti-Semitism, Congress members who are trying their best. We need everybody. We need the IDF for sure. But at the end of the day, none of those bodies can solve the problem of anti-Semitism. At best, they can deal with it or manage it to some degree or limit it to some degree, but they can't really save it, they can't solve it, and I'm not sure they can manage it either. The bottom line, said Ben-Gurion, we have to do what we have to do. And what do we have to do? Besides Israel defending itself, we as Jews around the world, we have to, as somebody said here before, what is our response to anti-Semitism? What did you say?
Become more Jewish.
To be more Jewish. Dafke. So too many Jews chose to deal with anti-Semitism by opting out. If you can't beat them, join them. Assimilation, they thought, was the answer, until a Chabad representative finds you. But we weren't created just to defend ourselves against racism. That's not a reason for existence. We have a positive reason. We have a constructive reason. And we have a positive mission to change the world for the good, yes. And it starts with ourselves and our families and our communities to be proud and practicing Jews who are confident and knowledgeable and live as Jews and raise our children and grandchildren as Jews with Jewish values.
Respect those who respect themselves.
You're taking the words out of my mouth. I'm getting there. You know the story Ben-Gurion told before the United Nations Commission on the partition of Palestine, before the state. He told the story of, they were questioning the Jewish right to land. You know, you came from Europe, you know. So what do you mean came from Europe? We are the original indigenous people here. So he quoted the story of the Mayflower. Remember the ship, the Mayflower, that brought the original American pilgrims to the colonies before they fought the British in the American Revolution? So he says, how many Americans know the name of the ship, the Mayflower? Okay, I see some recognition here. Do you know how many people were on the ship? I don't. Do you?
No.
I went to school. I read about it in school, but I don't remember how many people on the ship. You know which port they took off from? You know which port they landed in? Do you know what the menu was for the meals on the Mayflower? Anybody? Trade. Fish, fish and chips. What do they have? And Ben Gurion goes on to say that every Jew knows the Jewish story to freedom. Every Jew knows we were born in Egypt and went to Mount Sinai and received the Torah. And everyone knows when we left Egypt. It was Passover, the 15th of the month of Nisan. And every Jew knows there were 600,000 men, a few million people in all. And every Jew knows what was the menu. Matzah. And matzah balls. So what was Ben Gurion saying to the United Nations back in 1947? Give us a state because of the Holocaust? Not at all. Give us a state because of anti-Semitism? No way. That's negative, that's untrue. That's a Palestinian lie. That we got Israel because of the Holocaust. The world was feeling guilty. We got Israel because it is our homeland, our ancient homeland. We are the indigenous people. It's our land, and has been our land well over 3,000 years, long before there was such a thing as a Palestinian, centuries before Islam was born. The people demonstrating out there either don't know or don't want to know. They're completely ignorant of the history, of the facts. They've been sold a Bobemeiser, you know? You know what a Bobemeiser is? Old wives' tales, you know, some nonsense. We have a history, we have a destiny, and part of it is to be a light unto the nations, and if that means we're a conscience, so be it. As I told you, we had the last word after the Holocaust, and please God, we'll have the last word now as well. My father was just one example of many, many who survived and rebuilt their families, thank God. And every time a new great-grandchild was born, my father of 90 or 91 clutched this little great-grandchild infant to his heart. He never said anything, but we all knew what he was thinking. Hitler did not win. I won. I rebuilt my family, thank God. So, my friends, despite all our efforts, anti-Semitism is not going away anytime soon. We need all the organizations out there to help us, to defend us legally, politically. Israel needs good public relations, but don't become disillusioned when you see anti-Semitism is still here, and even that is today growing at an alarming rate. Don't become depressed. Because as Ben Gurion said, it doesn't matter what the nations say, it matters what we do. So learn from the people of Israel, who live in the worst neighborhood in the world. Everybody around them wants to kill them. Before October 7th, you know they do this global happiness survey? Have you heard of it? They do a global every year, for years now. And Israel has steadily climbed up the rankings. A couple of years ago, they broke the top 10. Last year, before October 7th, Israel came in at number 5, the 5th happiest country in the whole wide world, way ahead of America, Australia, England, even ahead of Switzerland. The only 4 countries ahead of Israel was, I think, Finland and Norway, you know, it's Scandinavia, Sweden. Huh?
Bhutan.
Who?
Bhutan.
No. Don't think so. Israel 5th. It's unbelievable that you could be living in such conditions and still be happy. It's unbelievable. We have a lot to learn from. Learn from the late lamented Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who said, as Rebbetzin Rochel beat me to the punch, non-Jews respect Jews who respect themselves. Unquote. And they lose respect from Jews who don't respect themselves. And certainly we should all learn from the Rebbe, our saintly teacher, and Rabbi Sachs's teacher. On the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbe, it's about nearly 5 years ago, a Los Angeles journalist, the editor of the Jewish newspaper in Los Angeles, his name is David Suissa. I read how he coined a phrase which stuck with me. I really like it, and I'm going to share it with you. He said, what was the Rebbe's response to anti-Semitism? Pro-Semitism. What does pro-Semitism mean? As my friend here said, be more Jewish. He founded these mitzvah campaigns. Torah study, tefillin, mezuzah, Shabbat candles, tzedakah, Jewish books, mikveh, kashrut, Jewish education, love one another. Do one more mitzvah, one more good deed, one more act of random kindness to someone out there. The Rebbe always focused on the positive rather than the negative. If Hitler and his henchmen hated us for being the conscience of the world, they were fighting not only Jews, they were fighting Judaism. They are fighting our value system, not just our persona. So if we assimilate and give up our Judaism, we are giving Hitler a posthumous victory, God forbid. If anti-Semites are targeting our faith, then the best response is to strengthen our faith. The Rebbe always reminded us that every mitzvah has cosmic significance. When a Jewish woman lights candles in Kauai, a Jewish man puts on tefillin in Kauai, comes to Chabad of Kauai, does a good deed, it has cosmic significance. It sends good vibrations all the way, not just to Los Angeles, to the Beach Boys. It sends it to Israel. It sends it to every Jew in the world. Our good deed here is helping them there, is protecting an Israeli soldier, is bringing blessing and divine protection and care to Jews, to our brothers and sisters around the world, all over. Please God, we should be more proud of who we are and practice even more than we did before as Jews, as our response. Whether we live in South Africa, whether we live in mainland USA, or whether we live in the 50th state, whatever the circumstances, we have to keep being Jewish, and more proudly so. Amen. I thank you.